Single mom told her neighbor, "My son's father is a Hell's Angel." What he did next left the whole town speechless. The boy stood alone at the edge of the gas station parking lot, holding a birthday cake he'd bought with lawn mowing money, watching the rain destroy it one drop at a time. He was 12 years old and had been waiting for 3 hours. The frosting ran blue and white down his fingers, pooling at his sneakers like something dying. Somewhere down Highway 61, an engine that was supposed to bring his father home had never started. Across the street, through the window of a diner called Maze, a man named Dalton Reeves set down his coffee cup and watched the boy's shoulders begin to shake. Wait, before the next ride begins. If this story already hit you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up, back to the road. The rain came harder. Dalton had been sitting in that booth for 40 minutes, nursing his third refill and pretending to read a newspaper from 2 days ago. Had moved into the house on Sycamore Street 6 weeks prior, a quiet rental with a sagging porch and a garage big enough for a man who didn't own much anymore. The neighborhood was the kind that time forgot. Clapboard houses, chain-link fences, and lawns that needed mowing by people who lost the energy to care. Had noticed the boy before, hard not to. Every morning at 6:15, the kid walked to the bus stop alone, backpack too heavy, shoelaces untied, looking over his shoulder like he was expecting someone to appear. Every afternoon at 3:40, he walked back. Same heavy bag, same untied shoes, same backward glance at nothing. His mother was a different story. Dalton had seen her exactly 4 times, once struggling with grocery bags in the rain, once arguing with a man in a truck who'd peeled away before she could finish her sentence, once sitting on her porch steps at 2 in the morning with her face in her hands, and once hanging laundry in the backyard while the boy did homework on the picnic table. She had dark hair that fell past her shoulders and the kind of exhaustion that lived in the bones. Her name, according to the mailbox, was Sarah Morrow. Now, Dalton watched her son because he knew that's who the boy was, same stubborn jaw, same way of standing like the ground might give way, and something old and buried shifted in his chest. He left a 10 on the table and walked out into the rain. The boy didn't look up until Dalton was 3 feet away. When he did, his eyes were red but dry. He'd stopped crying somewhere between the 2nd hour and the 3rd. What was left was worse, the flat, empty stare of a child who'd learned not to expect. "Cake looks rough," Dalton said. The boy said nothing. His fingers tightened on the ruined cardboard. "You waiting on someone?" A pause. Then, "He's not coming." "Who?" The boy's jaw worked. "Nobody." Dalton looked down the highway, then back at the kid. "How far's home?" 4 blocks. "That's a long walk in the rain with a soggy cake." He gestured with his chin toward the covered awning of the gas station. "Wanna wait it out?" "I've been waiting." The boy's voice cracked. "I'm done waiting." He started walking. Dalton watched him go for 10 seconds, then fell into step beside him. They didn't speak for the first block. The rain drummed on Dalton's jacket and soaked through the boy's thin hoodie. The cake dripped a trail of blue frosting on the sidewalk behind them. "What's your name?" Dalton asked. "Eli." "I'm Dalton. I live on your street, the gray house with the flag." Eli glanced at him sideways. "I know. You've got a motorcycle. Used to have a few more." "Mom says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "Your mom's right." Dalton shoved his hands in his pockets. "But we're not strangers anymore. I just told you my name and where I live. Now I'm just the guy who walked you home in the rain." Eli almost smiled. Almost. "That's not how it works." "How's it work then?" "I don't know." The boy looked down at the cake. "I thought I knew how things worked, I thought if you planned something and you waited and you did everything right, then the other person would show up. But that's not true." "No," Dalton said quietly. They turned onto Sycamore Street. The houses here leaned together like old men sharing secrets, porches sagging, paint peeling, yards fighting a losing battle against dandelions and despair. The Morrow house sat at the end of the block, smaller than the rest, with a tricycle rusting in the front yard and a light burning yellow in the kitchen window. Sarah Morrow was standing on the porch. Her arms were crossed, and even from 50 feet away, Dalton could see the way her body held tension, the coiled readiness of someone expecting bad news. When she saw Eli walking toward her with a stranger beside him, she came down the steps fast, her bare feet splashing in puddles. "Eli!" Her voice was sharp with relief. "Where have you been? I called you 6 times." "My phone died." The boy held up the cake. "I was at the gas station, waiting." Sarah's face changed. Something behind her eyes collapsed, rebuilt itself, collapsed again. She looked at the ruined cake, at her son's soaked clothes, at the careful blankness he wore like armor. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "He didn't come." Eli's voice was steady now, terribly steady. "I waited 3 hours, and he didn't come." Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, and she was pulling her son into her arms, cake and all, holding him against her chest like she could shield him from every disappointment the world had ever invented. Dalton stood there, rain running down his face, feeling like an intruder in someone else's grief. After a long moment, Sarah looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, guarded, assessing. "Who are you?" "Dalton Reeves. I live at the gray house. Saw your boy standing in the rain and walked him home." "Why?" It was the kind of question that didn't have a simple answer. Dalton shrugged. Didn't seem right to leave him there. Sarah studied him. He could feel her cataloging details, the gray in his beard, the scars on his knuckles, the way he stood with his weight balanced like a man who'd learned to expect trouble. She'd seen men like him before, that much was clear. "Thank you," she said, finally, "for bringing him home. He brought himself. I just kept him company." Dalton nodded once, then started back toward his house. He'd made it 3 steps when her voice stopped him. "Mr. Reeves." He turned. Sarah was still holding Eli, but her chin had lifted, and something fierce had entered her expression. His father, the one who didn't show up today. She paused, and Dalton watched her decide something. He's a Hell's Angel, or was, I don't even know anymore. But that's why he didn't come. That's why he never comes. Because whatever that club is, whatever they do, it matters more to him than this. She pressed her hand to her son's wet hair. "More than us," she finished. Dalton stood very still. The rain had softened to a mist, and somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing. He looked at Sarah Morrow, at the defiance in her posture, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held her son like he was the only true thing in a world full of lies, and he felt something crack open in his chest that he'd spent 15 years trying to keep sealed. "I'm sorry," he said. "It wasn't enough. Nothing would be." But he said it anyway. Then he walked home. The next morning, Dalton was in his garage at 5:30, doing what he always did when sleep wouldn't come, working on an engine that didn't need work. The motorcycle was a 1972 Harley-Davidson Shovelhead, black and chrome, more memory than machine. He'd rebuilt it 3 times in 20 years. Every bolt he tightened, every cable he adjusted, every drop of oil he changed was a conversation with ghosts. He was checking the timing when he heard footsteps on the gravel. Eli stood in the garage doorway, backpack over one shoulder, watching. "You're up early," Dalton said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep. Makes 2 of us." The boy stepped inside, his eyes moving over the tools on the pegboard, the spare parts on the workbench, the old photographs tacked to the wall. He stopped in front of a faded picture of 8 men standing in front of a row of motorcycles, squinting into sunlight from 30 years ago. "Is this you?" He pointed to a young man in the center, lean and long-haired, with a grin that hadn't yet learned about loss. Dalton glanced at the photo. Was. Who were the other guys? Brothers. Like real brothers? The only kind that matters. Dalton wiped his hands on a rag and straightened. "What are you doing here, Eli? Shouldn't you be getting ready for school?" "Mom's still asleep. She cried most of the night." The boy said it matter-of-factly, the way children do when grief has become routine. "I heard her through the wall." Dalton felt that crack in his chest widen. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault." Eli set his backpack down and moved closer to the workbench. "What are you working on?" "Timing chain. It's slipping." "Can I watch?" Dalton wanted to say no, wanted to keep his distance, stay invisible, remain the stranger who'd walked a kid home once and then faded back into his quiet, careful life. But the boy was looking at him with something fragile and hungry in his eyes, the look of someone searching for solid ground in a world that kept shifting. "You can do more than watch," Dalton heard himself say. "Hand me that wrench, the 3/8." Eli's face lit up. For the next 40 minutes, Dalton walked him through the basics: how an engine breathed, why timing mattered, what happened when the chain stretched and the valves fell out of sync. The boy listened like every word was a secret being trusted to him. At 6:15, Dalton walked him to the bus stop. That afternoon, Eli came back to the garage, and the next afternoon, and the one after that. Sarah noticed on the third day. She appeared at Dalton's door just after dinner, arms crossed, that guarded look back in her eyes. "He's spending a lot of time over here," she said. "He's curious about engines." "He's 12. He's curious about everything." She studied him the way she had that first night, cataloging, assessing, trying to read the story written in his scars. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Being kind. To him. To us." Her voice dropped. "I told you who his father is. I told you what I'm dealing with. Most people hear Hell's Angels and they don't want anything to do with it." Dalton leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not most people. I can see that." She hesitated. "I ran your name, found a few old articles. You used to ride with a club." "I did." "Iron Horseman, based out of Nevada. Disbanded in 2011 after—" She stopped. "After something bad happened." "That's right." "Are you dangerous, Mr. Reeves?" He thought about the question, thought about the things he'd done, the men he'd loved, the brothers he'd buried. Thought about the night 20 years ago when everything burned. "I was," he said, "a long time ago. Now I'm just a man who fixes engines and minds his business." "But you're not minding your business. You're teaching my son," he asked. Sarah looked at him for a long time. Something was happening behind her eyes, walls being tested, old locks being turned. "His father's name is Wade Morrow," she said quietly. "We were together for 3 years. I thought he was going to leave the club for me, for us. He promised. And then Eli came, and he promised again. And I believed him because I wanted to, because I needed to." She shook her head. "He shows up twice a year, maybe. Makes promises he won't keep. Buys Eli things I can't afford and then disappears for months. And every single time, my son waits for him. Waits and waits and waits. Like yesterday. Like yesterday. Like last Christmas. Like his 10th birthday, when Wade said he'd take him riding and then didn't answer his phone for 6 weeks." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I can't make him stop hoping. That's the worst part. No matter how many times Wade lets him down, Eli still believes that one day his father will choose him." Dalton was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you're the first person in this town who looked at my kids standing in the rain and decided to do something about it. Maybe because I'm tired of carrying this alone." She met his eyes. "Maybe because you look at Eli like you understand something I don't." "He reminds me of someone," Dalton said. "Who?" A memory flickered. A boy in a different garage, 25 years ago, holding a wrench like a sacred object, asking questions about camshafts and carburetor jets, desperate to belong to something bigger than himself. "Me," Dalton said. "He reminds me of me." A week passed, then two. Eli came to the garage every afternoon, and Dalton taught him everything: how to read a spark plug, how to true a wheel, how to listen for the hitch in an engine that meant something was wrong. The boy absorbed it all with a hunger that made Dalton's chest ache. Sarah began to thaw. She brought coffee one morning, asked about his service in the Marines, mentioned that she worked nights as a nurse at the county hospital. They talked on her porch after Eli went to bed, careful conversations about nothing important: the weather, the town, the way the old elm tree on the corner had started to lean. Dalton told her about Nevada, about the Iron Horseman, about the brothers he'd ridden with for 15 years and the fire that had ended everything. He didn't tell her about the betrayal that had started it, about the man who'd sold them out for money and left them to burn. Some stories needed to stay buried. One night, Sarah asked, "Do you miss it? The club?" Dalton looked out at the street, at the quiet houses and the empty sidewalks and the stars that glittered cold and distant overhead. "Every day," he said, "but missing something doesn't mean you should go back to it." "Why not?" "Because sometimes the thing you miss wasn't real to begin with. It was just what you wanted it to be." He paused. "And sometimes, even if it was real, it changed into something you don't recognize anymore, something that hurts more than it heals." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's how I feel about Wade, about what we had. I keep waiting for him to be who he used to be, but that person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did." "Maybe," Dalton agreed. "Or maybe he's still in there, buried under all the things he chose instead." "Do you think people can change?" "I think they can want to. Whether they do or not is a different question." They sat in silence after that, watching the night settle over Sycamore Street like a blanket being pulled over sleeping shoulders. 3 weeks after the birthday that never happened, Wade Morrow showed up. Dalton heard the engine first, a deep, aggressive rumble that cut through the Sunday morning quiet like a blade. He was on his porch with coffee when the bike came around the corner, a custom Softail, black and chrome, ridden by a man who looked like he'd been carved from leather and bad decisions. Wade Morrow was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest. His cut was black with red patches, the Hells Angels colors that meant something very specific to people who knew. He pulled up in front of Sarah's house and killed the engine, then sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door like he was gathering courage. Dalton watched from 50 yards away. The door opened. Sarah stood on the threshold, her arms crossed, her face hard as stone. They exchanged words. Dalton couldn't hear what, but the body language was clear enough. Wade wanted something. Sarah wasn't given it. Then Eli came out. The boy's whole body changed when he saw his father. His shoulders dropped, his chin lifted, and something raw and desperate flickered across his face. Hope and fear and longing all tangled together. He took a step forward, then stopped, looking at his mother. Sarah's expression cracked, just for a second, just enough for Dalton to see the war happening inside her. The mother who wanted to protect her son from disappointment, and the woman who couldn't bring herself to stand between a boy and his father. She nodded once. Eli ran. Wade swept him up in a bear hug, lifting him off the ground, saying something that made the boy laugh. Sarah turned away and went back inside. For the next 2 hours, Wade and Eli sat on the porch together. Dalton pretended to work on his fence, but his eyes kept drifting to the scene across the street. He watched Wade pull a wrapped present from his saddlebag, watched Eli tear it open to reveal a leather jacket sized for a boy, with a patch on the back that read "Little Brother." Watched the way Eli's face glowed as he put it on. And he watched Sarah watching from the window, her hand pressed to the glass, her expression unreadable. At 2 o'clock, Wade's phone buzzed. He looked at it, looked at Eli, said something that made the boy's shoulders slump. Then he hugged him again, quick this time, perfunctory, climbed on his bike, and rode away. Eli stood in the yard, wearing his new jacket, watching until the sound of the engine faded to nothing. He didn't move for a long time. Dalton set down his hammer and walked across the street. "Hey," he said. Eli didn't turn around. He had to go. Club business. "I heard." He said he'd be back next weekend. He promised. Dalton stood beside him, looking down the road that led to the highway, to the world beyond this town, to all the places Wade Morrow had chosen instead of his son. "That's a nice jacket," he said. "Yeah." Eli's voice was thick. "He said it means I'm part of the family, even when he's not here." Dalton wanted to say something true, something that would prepare the boy for the next broken promise, and the one after that, and all the ones that would follow. But Eli was 12 years old, and his eyes were shining, and sometimes hope was the only thing a kid had left to hold on to. "Come on," Dalton said instead. "Let's go work on the shovel head. I'll show you how to adjust the valves." They walked to the garage together. Wade didn't come back the next weekend, or the weekend after that. By the 3rd week, Eli had stopped wearing the jacket. Dalton found it one afternoon, crumpled in the corner of the garage, half hidden behind a stack of old tires. He didn't say anything, neither did Eli. But something had shifted in the boy. The raw hopefulness was gone, replaced by something quieter and harder. He still came to the garage every day, still asked questions, still listened when Dalton talked about engines and timing and the way things fit together. But there was a distance now, a wall being built. Sarah saw it too. "He's shutting down," she told Dalton one night on her porch. "He barely talks at dinner. His grades are slipping. His teacher called to say he got into a fight last week, first fight of his life." She rubbed her eyes. "I don't know how to reach him." "Give him time." "I've given him 12 years. How much more does he need?" "As much as it takes." Dalton looked at her. "He's not shutting down, Sarah. He's figuring out who he is when his father isn't the answer. That's hard. It hurts, but it's necessary." "How do you know?" "Because I had to do it too." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What happened to your father?" "He left when I was 7, came back when I was 15, stayed long enough to borrow money and steal my mother's jewelry, then disappeared again." Dalton shrugged. "I spent years waiting for him, believing that if I was good enough, smart enough, worthy enough, he'd choose me. And then, one day, I realized that his choices had nothing to do with me. He was broken in a way I couldn't fix, and the only thing I could control was what I did with the time I had left." "Is that when you joined the club?" "That's when I found my brothers." He smiled, and it was a sad smile, heavy with memory. "They weren't perfect. Some of them made terrible choices, and some of them died because of it. But they showed up. Every single time, they showed up. And that mattered more than blood." Sarah reached over and touched his hand. It was brief, barely a second, but Dalton felt it like an electric current. "Thank you," she said, "for being here. For him, for both of us." "It's not charity," he said. "I know. That's why it matters." On a Thursday evening in early October, Dalton was in the garage with Eli when a truck pulled up outside. It was old and battered, with rust eating the wheel wells and a Confederate flag sticker on the back window. Two men got out, young, hard-eyed, wearing cuts from a local support club that answered to the Hells Angels. Dalton set down his wrench. "Stay here," he said to Eli. He walked out to meet them. "Help you with something?" The taller one looked him over. "You Dalton Reeves? Who's asking?" "Name's Trace. This is Polk. We ride with the Red Devils. We're here on behalf of Wade Morrow." He tilted his head toward the garage. "That his kid in there?" "That's his kid. What do you want?" "Wade asked us to deliver a message. He's been detained. Some legal trouble out of state. He's going to be a while, and he wants the boy to know he didn't forget about him." Dalton studied them. They were young, mid-20s maybe, with the swagger of men who'd never had their teeth kicked in. The cuts they wore were flashy but clean. Prospects, probably, doing errands to earn their patches. "You could have called," he said. "Wade wanted it done in person. Sign of respect." Respect? Dalton let the words sit there. "So you drive all the way out here to tell a 12-year-old that his father's in jail?" Trace's expression hardened. "We came to tell him his father hasn't forgotten him. There's a difference. Not to the kid." Polk stepped forward. He was shorter than Trace, but broader, with a neck like a stump, and the kind of face that expected confrontation. "You got a problem with how we do things, old man?" Dalton looked at him. Just looked. And something in his eyes made Polk take a half step back. "I've got no problem," Dalton said quietly, "but I'm going to give you some advice, free of charge. That boy in there has spent his whole life waiting for a father who doesn't show up. He doesn't need another message from another stranger telling him that Wade's busy, Wade's sorry, Wade hasn't forgotten. He needs someone to actually be there. Not a proxy, not a promise, presence." He let that land. "So you can drive back and tell Wade Morrow that his message was delivered. But if he wants to mean something to his son, he's going to have to show up himself. No excuses, no intermediaries, just him." Trace and Polk exchanged glances. "You used to ride," Trace said. It wasn't a question. "A long time ago. Iron Horseman, Nevada chapter." Trace's eyes narrowed. "I've heard stories. Most of them aren't true. The one about the fire is." Dalton said nothing. Trace studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll pass along what you said, but Wade's gonna do what Wade does. You can't change a man like that." "I know." Dalton stepped back. "But I can make sure his son doesn't become one." They left. Dalton stood in the driveway, watching their taillights disappear, feeling the old familiar weight settle back into his bones. When he turned around, Eli was standing in the garage doorway. "Who were they?" the boy asked. "Nobody important. They were wearing cuts, like my dad's. Not like your dad's. They're from a different club." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's in jail, isn't he?" Dalton hesitated. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." The boy's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "How long?" "I don't know. They didn't say." Eli nodded slowly. He walked back into the garage, picked up the wrench Dalton had set down, and went back to work on the engine like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Dalton could see it in the set of his jaw, the stillness of his face. Another crack in the foundation. Another lesson in disappointment. He wanted to say something. Wanted to offer comfort, wisdom, anything. But some things couldn't be fixed with words. Some things just had to be carried. He picked up his own wrench and joined the boy at the workbench. They worked in silence until dark. 2 days later, Sarah invited Dalton to dinner. It was awkward at first, the three of them sitting around a table that usually held two, making small talk about the weather and the meal and anything except the elephant in the room. But somewhere between the meatloaf and the mashed potatoes, something shifted. Eli laughed at one of Dalton's stories about a carburetor that caught fire. Sarah smiled in a way Dalton hadn't seen before. Easy, unguarded, almost young. After dinner, Eli went to his room to do homework. Sarah and Dalton sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars emerge one by one. "He told me about the men who came," Sarah said. "The ones from Wade's club. I figured he would. He said you stood up for him, told them off." "I told them the truth. That's not the same thing." She turned to look at him. The porch light caught her face, and Dalton saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not just exhaustion, but the shadow of something that might have been hope. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? And don't tell me it's because he reminds you of yourself. There's something else." Dalton took a long breath. The wine was warm in his chest, and the night was quiet, and for the first time in years, he felt the urge to tell the truth. "There was a kid," he said, "in my club, a boy named Marcus. His father rode with us, a man named Bishop, who had more loyalty than sense and a temper that got us all in trouble more times than I can count. But he loved that kid, loved him more than anything in the world." He paused. Sarah waited. "Bishop died when Marcus was 14. Got caught in a bad situation, wrong place, wrong time. And after that, Marcus was ours, the club's. We raised him, taught him, tried to keep him on the right path." Dalton's voice dropped. "But the world doesn't care about good intentions. The same people who killed Bishop came for the rest of us. And when the fire happened, when everything burned, Marcus was there. He was 19 years old, and he died trying to save a building that was already gone." "Oh, God." Sarah's hand found his. "I'm sorry. I couldn't protect him. I promised Bishop I would, and I couldn't." Dalton looked at her. "So when I see Eli, when I see a kid who's waiting for a father who won't show up, who's learning the wrong lessons from the wrong people, I can't walk away. I can't leave him standing in the rain, because I know what happens when you do." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she leaned over and kissed him. It was soft, brief, more promise than passion. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "You're a good man, Dalton Reeves." "I'm not, but I'm trying to be." "That's enough." She squeezed his hand. "For now, that's enough." Autumn deepened. The leaves turned gold and red, then fell, then scattered in the wind that blew cold down Sycamore Street. Eli's 13th birthday came and went, celebrated with a cake that didn't melt, a dinner that Dalton helped cook, and a gift-wrapped set of mechanics tools that made the boy's face light up brighter than any leather jacket ever had. Wade didn't call. Sarah and Dalton grew closer. Dinners became routine. Conversations on the porch became confessions, the slow, steady peeling back of layers that happens when two damaged people decide to trust each other. She told him about her parents, who died when she was 22, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but student debt and a nursing degree. He told her about the Marines, about the man he'd been before the Iron Horsemen found him. Angry, directionless, looking for a fight he could win. They didn't put a label on what they were. They didn't need to. Some things didn't need names. By December, Dalton had become a fixture in the Morrow household. He helped with repairs, taught Eli to change the oil in Sarah's car, sat at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings while she made pancakes, and the boy worked on homework he'd been putting off all week. The town noticed. Neighbors who'd kept their distance from the single mom with the biker ex started to warm up. The woman at the grocery store smiled instead of frowning. The principal at Eli's school stopped looking at Sarah like she was a problem to be managed. It was subtle, the way acceptance spread, not because of anything Dalton did, but because of what his presence represented: stability, permanence, the suggestion that maybe, despite everything, the Morrows were going to be okay. And then, 3 days before Christmas, Wade came back. It was noon on a Tuesday. Dalton was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a repair job when his phone buzzed. "Sarah, he's here. Please come." He broke every speed limit on the way home. Wade's bike was parked in the driveway when Dalton arrived. He could hear raised voices through the front door. Sarah's sharp and furious, Wade's low and pleading. He didn't knock. He walked in. They were in the living room. Wade stood by the fireplace, his hands raised in surrender, his face a mask of contrition. Sarah stood on the stairs, watching. "I'm clean," Wade was saying. "I've been clean for 2 months. The charge got dropped. It was all a misunderstanding, and I'm out, I'm free, and I want to make things right. I want to be here, for real this time." "You've said that before." Sarah's voice was ice. "You've said it 100 times. This time is different. Why? What's changed?" "I have." Wade took a step toward her. "I swear to God, Sarah, I've changed. The club? I'm stepping back, taking a break. I talked to the president and he agreed. Family first. That's the code, right? Family first." "The code?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know anything about family. You show up when it's convenient, make promises you can't keep, and then disappear the second something shinier comes along. That's not family. That's not even close. I know I've messed up, but I'm here now, and I'm asking for a chance, one chance, to prove that I can be what you need." What he needs. He looked at the stairs, at Eli. The boy's face was unreadable. Sarah followed Wade's gaze. For a moment, her expression softened, the mother's instinct overriding everything else. Then she saw Dalton standing in the doorway, and something hardened again. "He's part of this conversation," she said, "whether you like it or not." Wade turned, his eyes narrowed. "Reeves. Morrow. I've heard about you. The guys told me." Wade's jaw tightened. "Said you've been playing house with my family while I was away." "I've been helping. That's not the same thing." "Looks pretty same to me." Wade stepped forward. He was taller than Dalton, broader, younger. "Let me make something clear. This is my family, my son. Whatever you think is happening here, it's not." "I'm not thinking anything." Dalton kept his voice even. "I'm just here because Sarah asked me to be." "Well, I'm asking you to leave. That's not your call to make." They stood there, two men with histories written in scar tissue and silence, neither willing to give ground. The air in the room crackled. Then Eli spoke. "Dad?" Wade turned. "Yeah, buddy. You promised." The boy's voice was soft but steady. "Last time you were here, you promised you'd be back the next weekend. You promised you'd call. You promised we'd go riding." "I know, and You didn't call." Eli stood up. "You didn't come. You sent strangers to tell me you were in jail." He came down the stairs slowly, his eyes locked on his father's face. "Do you know how that felt? Do you know what it's like to wait for someone who never shows up?" "Eli." "No." The word was sharp, final. "I used to make excuses for you. I told myself you were busy, you were important, you had club stuff to handle. But Dalton's in a club too, or he was, and he still shows up. Every single day." Eli stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "He taught me how to fix engines. He helped Mom with the bills. He came to my school thing when you forgot I even had one." The boy's voice cracked. "He's here, Dad. He's always here. And you're not." The silence that followed was absolute. Wade stood frozen, his face a battlefield of emotions. Guilt, anger, grief, something that might have been shame. He looked at Eli, at Sarah, at Dalton. Then his shoulders dropped. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're right about all of it." He ran a hand over his face. "I've been a terrible father. I've made promises I couldn't keep and excuses that didn't matter. And I don't blame you for being angry. I don't blame any of you." He moved toward the door. Sarah stepped aside to let him pass. "But I meant what I said," Wade continued. "I want to change. I'm going to change. Not because I expect you to believe me. I haven't earned that. But because it's the right thing to do. For Eli, for you," he looked at Dalton, "even for him." He paused at the door. "I'm going to rent a place in town. Stay for a while. Be around, not underfoot, but close. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." He met Eli's eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to earn it." Then he walked out. The sound of his engine starting was loud in the quiet house. They listened as it faded down the street, then disappeared entirely. Eli sat down on the bottom step. Sarah sat beside him and pulled him close. Dalton stayed where he was, feeling like a stranger in a family drama that wasn't his to resolve. After a long moment, Eli looked up. "Do you think he means it?" Dalton considered the question. He thought about Wade's face, the weariness, the defeat, the flicker of something that might have been genuine regret. He thought about all the men he'd known who'd made similar promises and broken them, and the rare few who hadn't. "I think he wants to mean it," Dalton said carefully. "Whether he can follow through is a different question." "What would you do if you were me?" "I'd give him a chance to prove himself."
"But I wouldn't wait around for him to do it." Dalton crouched down to Eli's level. "You've got your own life to live, kid. Your own choices to make. Don't put that on hold for someone else's timeline." Eli nodded slowly. Then, surprising everyone, he stood up and hugged Dalton. It was brief and awkward, the way hugs are between boys and men who aren't related. But it meant something. Dalton felt it in his chest like a key turning in a lock. "Thanks," Eli said, "for everything." "Anytime," Dalton replied. "That's what neighbors are for." True to his word, Wade rented a small apartment 2 blocks from Sycamore Street. He was visible but not intrusive, showing up at Eli's basketball games, waving from across the parking lot when Sarah dropped the boy at school, making himself available without demanding attention. It was strange at first. Dalton kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Wade to revert to old patterns, to disappear into the night on some club business that mattered more than his son. But weeks passed, and the shoe stayed on. Wade got a job at a local garage. Nothing fancy, just oil changes and tire rotations, the kind of work that got grease under your fingernails and kept you honest. He stopped wearing his cut in public. His calls to Eli became regular, predictable, and he kept his promises, the small ones at least. He showed up when he said he would, he left when he said he would. He didn't ask for more than he was given. In January, he asked if he could take Eli to a movie. Sarah said yes. Dalton watched them walk to Wade's truck together, the boy stiff and uncertain, the father careful and restrained. They came back 3 hours later, talking about the film, arguing about whether the ending was good or cheap. Eli was laughing. Sarah cried that night, after the boy was in bed. Dalton held her on the porch, not saying anything, just being there while she processed something she'd stopped believing was possible.
"I don't know what to do with this," she said. "With him actually trying. You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it happen. What if he hurts him again? What if this is all an act, and 6 months from now he's gone, and Eli even more broken than before? Then Eli will deal with it, and we'll help him." Dalton tilted her chin up. "But you can't protect him from every possible pain. That's not how it works. All you can do is make sure he knows he's not alone." She kissed him. Longer this time. Deeper. "I love you," she said. It was the first time either of them had said it. "I know," he smiled. "I love you too." Spring came. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and the world shook off its winter coat with the kind of enthusiasm that only the Midwest could muster. Eli turned 13 and a half. He'd grown 3 inches since the fall, and his voice had started to crack in the way that mortified him and delighted his mother. He still came to Dalton's garage every afternoon, but now there was another presence sometimes. Wade, standing at the edge of the driveway, asking permission before stepping onto the property, watching his son work on engines with the man who'd become something like a second father. They were awkward together at first, Dalton and Wade. 2 men circling each other, unsure of the boundaries, wary of the history that neither of them talked about. But gradually, painfully, a truce emerged. It started with a nod across the garage, then a question about valve timing, then an hour of working side by side on the shovel head, not speaking, just wrenching, the silence filled by the sound of metal on metal and the smell of oil and gasoline. One evening, after Eli had gone inside and Sarah was working the late shift, Wade lingered in the garage doorway. "I looked you up," he said, "after the guys told me about you." Dalton kept wiping down his tools. "Find anything interesting?" "Enough." Wade stepped inside. "The fire."
The men who died. The ones who got away. He paused. You were set up. We were betrayed. There's a difference. By who? Dalton set down the rag. A man I trusted. Someone I thought was a brother. He turned to face Wade. He sold us out for money, made a deal with a rival club, gave them our location, and disappeared before the flames started. 8 men died that night. Good men. Men who had families and futures and reasons to live. And you? I survived. Didn't feel like a blessing at the time. Dalton shrugged. The club dissolved after that. The ones who were left scattered. I came here because it was far away from everything I knew, and I needed to become someone different. Wade was quiet for a long moment. I've done things I'm not proud of, things that keep me up at night. But I never betrayed my brothers. I know. How? Because you're still alive. Dalton met his eyes. In my world, betrayal was a death sentence. The fact that you're standing here means you've kept your word when it mattered. Wade nodded slowly. Something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, maybe not ever, but an understanding. A recognition of shared experience, of wounds that never fully healed. "Thank you," Wade said, "for being there for him when I wasn't. Don't thank me. Just be there now. I'm trying, I know." Dalton extended his hand. "That's all any of us can do." Wade took it. The handshake was brief, firm, and final. A truce, a treaty, a promise between 2 men who understood the weight of promises. On a Saturday in late May, the town held its annual spring festival. It was a small affair. Craft booths and fried food, a high school band playing covers of songs from 20 years ago, kids running through inflatable obstacle courses while their parents drank beer in lawn chairs. Dalton went with Sarah and Eli. Wade met them there. For the first time, people saw them together, the single mom, the biker father, the quiet neighbor, and the boy who'd somehow survived the chaos of his own family. There were whispers at first, the way there always are in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. But by the end of the day, the whispers had faded. They looked like a family. A strange one maybe, a complicated one, but a family nonetheless. Eli won a stuffed bear at the ring toss and gave it to his mother. Wade bought him a corn dog and told him stories about riding through Montana in the summer of '09. Dalton sat with Sarah on a picnic bench, watching the sun set over the fairgrounds, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. "Hey," Sarah leaned into him. "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing." "Liar." He smiled. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. How you can be in one place, doing one thing, convinced that's all there is. And then something shifts, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely." "Good shift or bad shift?" "Good." He kissed her temple. "Definitely good." Across the fairgrounds, Eli was teaching Wade how to play the water gun game.
The father was losing spectacularly, and the son was laughing harder than Dalton had ever heard. "He's going to be okay," Sarah said, "isn't he?" Yeah. Dalton watched them, the boy and his father, learning how to be around each other, figuring out what came next. "I think he is." Summer arrived with a vengeance, turning Sycamore Street into an oven and sending everyone indoors by noon. Dalton's garage became a refuge, cool enough to work, quiet enough to think. He was teaching Eli how to rebuild a carburetor when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Her voice was strange, careful. Dalton wiped his hands and followed her outside. A man was standing by the mailbox. He was old, 70s maybe, with a white beard and a face like cracked leather.
He wore jeans and a faded denim shirt. No cut, no patches, but there was something about the way he stood that spoke of a lifetime on two wheels. "Dalton Reeves," the man said. "Been a long time." Dalton stopped. His heart had started doing something strange in his chest. Knox. The name came out rough, scraped from a place he'd sealed shut years ago. "I thought you were dead." "Almost was. Got close a few times." Knox smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we talk?" They sat on the porch while Sarah took Eli inside. Knox refused coffee, refused water, refused everything except the chance to say what he'd come to say. "I know who did it," he said. "The fire, the betrayal. I know who sold us out." Dalton went very still. "It took me years to find out. Followed threads that led nowhere. Paid off people who lied to my face. Chased ghosts across half the country. But I found him." Knox's jaw tightened. It was Ryder. Ryder! The name hit Dalton like a punch to the gut. "No, that's not possible. Ryder died in the fire. I saw—" "You saw a body. Someone else's. Ryder paid a vagrant to take his place, then slipped out the back before the flames started." Knox's voice was flat, controlled, but there was rage underneath it. Old rage, patient rage, the kind that had been waiting 15 years for release. "He's alive, Dalton, living outside of Albuquerque under a different name. Got a wife, a kid, a little business selling real estate." He spat the words like poison. "Living like it never happened. Like 8 men didn't burn because of him." Dalton sat there, trying to process. Ryder, the man he'd called brother. The man who'd stood beside him at Marcus's funeral, who'd wept over the coffin, who'd sworn vengeance on the men responsible. The man who had been the man responsible. "Why are you telling me this?" Dalton asked. "Because you have a right to know. Because the others can't know. They're dead or scattered or so far gone they wouldn't care anymore." Knox leaned forward. "And because I want to know what you're going to do about it." Dalton looked at the house. Through the window, he could see Sarah and Eli at the kitchen table, playing cards, laughing about something. A life had built. A family had found. A peace he hadn't known was possible. He thought about Ryder in Albuquerque. About the wife who didn't know, the kid who'd never understand. About the justice that had been waiting 15 years to be served. "Nothing," he said. "What?" "I'm not going to do anything." Dalton stood up. "Ryder made his choices. He'll answer for them eventually. If not in this life, then the next. But I'm done living in the past. I've got something now that matters more than revenge. 8 men, Dalton. Marcus died. Your brother. I know who died." Dalton's voice was sharp. "I carry them every day. But killing Ryder won't bring them back. It won't undo what happened. It'll just add another body to the pile and put everything I've built here at risk." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Knox. I can't help you." The old man stared at him for a long moment. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or something closer to understanding. "You've changed," he said finally. "I hope so." Knox stood.
He looked older now than he had when he'd arrived, the weight of his mission settling back onto shoulders that had been carrying it too long. "Take care of yourself, Reeves. You too, Knox." They didn't shake hands. Some goodbyes didn't need ceremony. Dalton watched him drive away, then went inside to join his family. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of heat and happiness. Eli got his first part-time job, washing cars at the garage where Wade worked. Sarah cut back her night shifts, spent more time at home, started talking about the future like it was something to look forward to instead of survive. Wade stayed. Not bad. There were slips, moments when the old life called and he had to fight the urge to answer. But he stayed. He showed up. He kept his word. On the anniversary of the birthday that had started everything, the day Eli had stood in the rain with a ruined cake, waiting for a father who never came, they did something different. They rode. Wade had bought a second bike, a smaller one, easier to handle, perfect for a teenager learning the road. He taught Eli the basics in parking lots and side streets, patient and careful in a way he'd never been before. And on that Saturday, the four of them, Wade and Eli on their bikes, Dalton and Sarah in the truck behind them, drove out to the lake where Dalton had taken Eli fishing once, back when everything was still uncertain. They parked by the water and watched the sun set. Eli sat between his parents, both of them, the one who'd left and the one who'd stayed. Sarah leaned against Dalton, her hand in his, her eyes on the boy who'd survived everything the world had thrown at him. "Not bad," Wade said, looking at the sky. "Not bad at all," Dalton agreed. Eli grinned. "Can we do this again next year?" "Yeah, buddy." Wade put his arm around his son. "Every year." It was a promise, a real one, the kind that meant something. And this time, Dalton believed it would be kept. Years later, when people in town talked about the Morrows, they'd shake their heads and smile. They'd talk about the single mom who'd raised a boy alone, who'd somehow found love with a quiet neighbor, who'd forgiven a man most people would have written off forever. They'd talk about the biker who'd come back, who'd changed, who'd proved that second chances weren't just stories. They'd talk about the kid who'd grown up to be something special, a mechanic like the men who taught him, but also something more. A man who understood that family wasn't about blood or patches or promises made and broken. It was about showing up. Every single day, no matter what. And they'd talk about the stranger who'd walked a boy home in the rain and everything that happened after. What he did next left the whole town speechless, they'd say. But that wasn't quite right. What he did next wasn't speechless. It was quiet, steady, ordinary in the best possible way. He stayed. That was all. That was everything. He stayed.